Hello and welcome to our third lesson of Key Question 7, Rebuilding the Country After 1945 of Depression, War and Recovery, 1930 to 1951. What we're going to be focusing on today is educational opportunities following the Act of 1944, and then we're also going to move on and look at the Homes for All policy as well. So we're going to look at those two things today. So to start, we're going to do a little bit of listening today. So we're going to create a spider diagram. I'm going to give you some information, and as I'm talking, you're going to pause the video, you're going to listen to what I'm saying, and you're going to make some notes around your spider diagrams. Okay, so it's a little bit of a lecture based today to get your listening skills developed. So what I want you to do is put education into the middle of your page. So if you just pause and do that now, and then as I said, I'm going to carry on and I'm going to give you some information, and I want you to condense it down and pop it around your spider diagram for me. Okay. So to start with, in 1944, the Butler Education Act came out, okay? Now, Butler was a conservative. He was in Churchill's government, okay? So the act was actually passed while Churchill was still in power because Labour didn't get in until 1945, if you remember from Key Question 6. It created a Ministry of Education with the aim of providing a comprehensive national system of education. So bringing education under a national umbrella and trying to provide it for everybody. But the war and the lack of money meant Butler didn't actually get the chance to implement it. So Labour brought it into law in 1947, okay? So, just going back a sec, sorry, which evil giant do you think this would tackle? So think about the Beveridge report now. So have a little 10-second think. So hopefully you've come to the conclusion that it was trying to tackle the ignorance. Changing educational opportunities was trying to tackle ignorance, that evil giant that Beveridge had highlighted in his report, okay? So the 1944 Education Act set the school leaving age to 15. Previous to this, school wasn't actually compulsory, and it cost as well. So it introduced free secondary schools. It was now offered to all children of all backgrounds instead of only those who could afford it. Now that was the real game changer. It didn't matter what your social class was, and this was sort of a moral, so to speak, of the Labour government during this time. What they sort of stood for, the class mobility, that you, just because you were born into a certain class didn't mean you had to stay there. You could have the same opportunities as everybody else. So that was a real game changer for a lot of people. During the final year of primary school, so in year 6 then, pupils would sit an 11+ exam. The result of this exam would then determine which school they would actually attend. So the 11+ was a sort of IQ test that they would do at the end of their school in primary school. And there was 3 types of school. There was grammar schools for academic pupils. So if they passed the 11+, they would go to the grammar schools. There was the secondary modern schools for practical subjects, and there was the technical schools to learn practical skills. Those who failed the 11+ were expected to go into what they called unskilled jobs at the time. This is important because it meant that many children gained a good education, which often led to employment. So it meant that children from poorer backgrounds who perhaps had the intelligence to do so, or what the government thought was intelligence, obviously this can be measured in lots of different ways now, but we'll get to that in a second, would go on and have the chance to go to university in a way that they didn't before. The stages were set up by the local authorities. It would set up local education authorities, meals, milk, medical service provided at every school. Now again, this was also a game changer because you think about the slum areas where people were, the starvation and the deprivation that was happening, children could now go to school and get a good meal. And this has massive effects on cognitive brain development, okay? So your brain, as you probably know, works a lot better if you're fed, okay? Because you're not focusing on starving, and it helps develop you a little bit more, obviously. So that was a proper game changer as well, because obviously they're actually being fed better than they were at home because their parents couldn't afford to feed them. Medical services as well. Again, this is a couple of years before the NHS has come into fruition, so this is an absolute game changer as well. It also made a daily act of religious worship compulsory within schools. So was it a success? It did provide academic opportunity for all, regardless of what class they were in, as we've discussed. Going to secondary moderns meant a lot of opportunities were taken away, though, because the 11+ was just an intelligence test, and it was taken at the end of primary school, and it basically defined their life. So if they woke up and had a bad day and failed it, when on a good day perhaps they would have passed it, that's it, they're not allowed to go to grammar school. There's no retaking it, that was that. And obviously not everybody performs as best as they can in tests either, so that is that as well, that you can't measure all intelligence via tests. So it seemed like it was a little bit unfair to have an 11-year-old take this test that was sort of going to define the rest of their lives as well. And then because of that, grammar schools were much more funded. Okay, they had lots more money with more skilled teachers, better facilities, and girls' grammar schools were not. They still went to separate schools to boys, and they weren't actually as well funded as the boys' schools were. There wasn't many technical schools opened, and the secondary modern schools really didn't provide the opportunity for a lot of people. So, for instance, boys and girls would be separated. Boys would go and do woodwork, girls would go and do home economics. There was actually even flats built into these secondary moderns, whereby girls would go and practice being housewives. Okay, so if they did go to a secondary modern, the opportunity to do anything academic was pretty much taken away straight away. And again, it didn't seem fair to make this decision based on one test that they'd done at the end of year 6. Okay, there's a picture there as Manchester Grammar School. You can see very all boys, very prim and proper. Okay, very nice looking halls, quite well funded. Again, the girls' schools weren't as well funded as this. There's no evidence for this, but there are some suggestions by some historians that actually the 11 plus you had to get higher if you were a girl to get into grammar school as well. So there was a lot of discrepancies within the Act as well. Okay, so that's the Education Act, and that's the information that we need for that. What I'd like you to do now is on a new page, probably a double page for this because you're going to need a lot of space. So I would go onto a double page and put Homes for All policy in the middle for me. And I want you around your page to put bad housing, prefabs, house build programmes. Prefabs is there twice, but it needn't be. New Towns Act 1946 and the Housing Act of 1949. We're going to go through all of these headings one by one. You are going to be putting bullet points underneath them, which is why I'm suggesting that you do it on a double page. So I'm going to let you pause the video and do that now. So bad housing. So immediately after the war, many people lived in slums, badly built, overcrowded, poor sanitation, quite similar to what they'd lived in the 1930s. Obviously, as well, 25% of homes had actually been destroyed during the war, and there's a massive shortage. No homes have been built in 6 years because obviously the country's entire effort was directed towards the war. A lot of the population were homeless. They were sharing with relatives. Lots of them squatting in old army camps. The soldiers coming back from the war come back sometimes to find that their houses had been destroyed. There was no homes in the post-war baby boom. There was a huge baby boom after the Second World War. There's actually a generation called the baby boomers, and this made the problem worse because obviously the population was growing and there was not enough houses or shops or factories or workplaces to put these people. So the responsibility for housing was given to the Ministry for Health. So Aaron Bevan, we've heard of him before with the NHS. He was the Ministry for Health and Housing. Okay, so these are the problems that we're facing after the Second World War with housing. So one of the ways that the government decided to tackle this was by building what they call prefabs, so prefabricated houses. Okay, so after the war, the first priority was to deal with homelessness. The minister continued the wartime policy of building prefabricated houses. These were houses that were made in factories and basically could be quickly assembled on site. They were only supposed to last for 10 years. And you can see in this picture by here, they're actually built in a factory and sort of just plonked on a piece of land. But what they did have was running water. They had some of them had heating, they had electric inside them. This is something that people living in the slums were not used to. Bear in mind now that the bathrooms would normally be outside in the streets, or if they needed water, they would have to basically, or they needed to warm up water, they'd have to go to a well, they'd have to warm up water over the fire. So these houses, despite the fact that they were made in the factory and quite small, were very luxurious to some people. Now, they were only supposed to last 10 years, but only, I think, in the last 5 or so years have they actually, as of the last prefab has been taken down. If you go to St Fagans, there is an example of a prefab there. It's really interesting. But you can see they were only supposed to last 10 years, but they lasted a lot longer than that. Okay, there was 156,623 prefabs built in some areas, and they were a really quick solution to the housing shortage. Okay, so house build programs. Bevan restricted private housing building, so you couldn't buy a piece of land and buy a house for yourself, to ensure building supplies and labour could be used for council housing instead. And you see all of these brand new council houses being built between 45 and 53. Again, these council estates had houses in them with running water, heating, electricity. People felt that they were living in palaces. They used to call the high-rise flats palaces in the sky because, again, you ended up with a house like you've never had before. But like after living in a slum, this was a completely different experience for you as well. So the New Towns Act 1946 and the Town and Country Planning Act 1947, this act tried to resolve the inner city problems of overcrowding by relocating people to new towns. These were communities built purposely to house the people from the inner cities. 12 new towns were planned. Bevan promoted a vision of new estates where the working man, the doctor and the clergy will be in close proximity to each other. Councils were given more planning powers in 1947 and the Country Planning Act to buy land to redevelop. Okay, so you ended up in 1946 with 12 new towns. One of them was Cwmbran. This is Cwmbran in 1950, so not long after it had been built. So that, and several towns in England as well were built. Okay, there were ups and downs to these. One of the problems being is that the slum communities were quite, well, they were just those, they were communities. You could always knock next door if you needed something from your neighbour. If someone went into labour, if someone needed help with their health and things like that, you could rely on your next door neighbours. There was a proper community spirit within these slum areas. You could walk into the town, you could walk to the market, you could walk to the shop to buy what you needed. A lot of these council estates were built on the edges of the town, and it isolated, and particularly women, because women obviously were the housewives, they were at home on their own all day. It isolated a lot of these people from each other, and so for some people, despite the new lovely houses with the running water and the heating, found it quite difficult because of that as well. Okay. And then we've got the Housing Act 1949. Local authorities were allowed to buy homes for improvement or conversions. 75% of the cost were paid by the national government. Additionally, private homeowners could be given 50% home improvement grants. So basically money ploughed into the economy, into the housing economy, to improve homes, to build new homes. The following video, which I will get you the YouTube link for and I'll put it up for in a sec, explains the development. So I'll show you, I'll get you that link, which is on your worksheet in a second. So you should have a sheet attached to this video, and what I want you to do is sort the impact of the Homes for All policy into positives and negatives. So positives, that it helps people, and negatives, why was it not quite what it should have been. So again, there is a sheet with the YouTube video from the previous slide attached to this. Watch the YouTube video to start, to finish up filling in your spider diagram, and then sort the impacts on the sheet that's attached to this for me. And once you've done that, we're done. Thank you very much.